Hello YouTube and fellow wasteland wanderers, and welcome back to The Bigger Pixel, your source for weekly Fallout 4 content. I am your host, the Gaming Mandroid, and today we're going to be looking at a very fun melee-focused build that will let you get in touch with your inner barbarian. That's right, this is our Grognak the Barbarian build. So jumping right in, let's take a look at the initial starting special stats for this build. We're going to be putting 4 points into strength. This is very important. It's going to give us access to, of course, our big leagues perk, which is crucial, and armor as well. Surprisingly enough, we will not be taking Blacksmith. More on that later. But strength overall is very important for this build because for every point that you put into strength, you will receive 10% additional melee damage, and that is very important to keep in mind. Perception we will be keeping at 1, very low. This is really not going to be a drawback at all for us because we're going to be using melee weapons exclusively, which are going to automatically get a 95% success rate in VATS. Normally that's what perception mostly affects, but it's going to be pretty irrelevant to us because we're going to get automatically 95% as long as we're in range. So we're just going to leave that at 1. We're going to put endurance at 4, mainly so that we can get access to our Chem resistant perk. I'll say it once, I'll say it a million times. Chems are very powerful in this game, and if you're not using them, you should start using them right away. Endurance is also going to help us get a little bit more health, a little bit beefier for this build. He is going to be taking a lot of bullets. Charisma we are going to leave at 1. This is our barbarian build, of course, and I think he'd much rather put an axe in someone's skull than try to persuade them to do anything else. Intelligence we will also be leaving at 1. This may seem like an unpopular choice for some people. I know a lot of people are obsessed with intelligence because they want the experience boost, they want the power armor and whatnot. However, I really advise that you don't even pick up the intelligence bobblehead. Leave it at 1 so that you can get the maximum value out of your idiot Savant perk. Agility we will be putting at 9 for early access to the Blitz perk, which is absolutely critical to Grognak's main play style, using VATS to get as many criticals as possible. Luck will be at 9 as well. We are going to be putting a lot of different perks into luck. So as you can see, this is an agility and luck based build. I have seen several other melee focused builds with different strategies. Predominantly I'd say the two alternate styles are either focusing entirely on strength and getting the rooted perk early, which we will sort of do in our endgame for this build. The alternative is an agility sneak based build that really just plays off of sneak and the ninja perk, which has an unreasonable amount of damage, honestly, at the 10 times level. Combine that with the Blitz level 2 increased VATS range, and you have, honestly, a broken gameplay style. But we're not going to be taking either of those routes. We are going to walk the lucky path, which I think really defines the gameplay of this build, and honestly makes it a lot of fun. So just a few notes on the perk list that you're going to see scrolling across the top of this video. I do think that all builds have about 5 or 6 perks that are really the core, most important mechanics of the playstyle for that build. So with the Grognak the Barbarian build, I would say that the most important, number 1 perk is the Idiot Savant perk. That's why we're going to take it at level 1. It's really useful for leveling up even faster than you would with maximum intelligence. That is concerned. There's a lot of detailed map that you can find out there that compares intelligence to the Idiot Savant as far as how quickly you level, and Idiot Savant pretty much beats out even maximized intelligence, even into late game. It's most noticeable in early game, but it's just fantastic overall, and it will level you up quickly. Of course, with the melee build, big leagues is critical, but Blitz is really the magic of the Grognak build, and it's useful for a lot of different reasons. It's effectively going to give you not just greater range, but at its second level, massively increased damage on enemies that are really a silly distance from you to still be attackable with melee weapons. And if you haven't seen it in action, you can see it right now. It's basically like teleporting all over the battlefield, which cuts down on your running between enemies so much that you're just going to be getting shot much less often because you're going to be able to bounce around the battlefield and just knock out enemy after enemy. The other perks that are really important for this are, of course, critical focused perks on the luck tree. A lot of them are useful, but I'd say the most important ones are definitely the Better Criticals perk, just to get 50% more critical damage. That's a lot of additional damage, and you do that all 3 times for ultimately I think 3 times total critical damage. And Critical Banker. Critical Banker is very useful because it allows you to not only store additional criticals, which will let you knock down those legendary and boss enemies in basically just 2 hits. If you can just crit them twice, you can probably not kill them in one go all at once. But it also allows you to strategize a little bit more with and let you more freely use your criticals on even lower level enemies, because you'll have one in reserve for that rainy day kind of moment when you unexpectedly run into a tough enemy. And now I just want to cover some of your early game priorities with the Grognak the Barbarian build. These are the things, sort of the checklist of chores that you want to get done as early as possible. You can probably get just about all of this done by, I don't know, level 18 or so. And it's just going to set you up everything you need to really go through your entire playthrough and get the gameplay style that is portrayed here as early as possible. So the very first thing you want to do is get Kait. If you don't know where Kait is, she's at the combat zone. It's just a little bit east of Diamond City. You're going to need Kait as early as possible to help you pick locks. As you can see on the perk list above, we don't have any lock picking. We don't have any computer hacking. Computer hacking is probably not going to be too much of a barrier to you. If you really need it, you can go get Nick Valentine. But you will need Kait, especially early on, because your next priority is to go to the Hubris comics. Hubris comics is, of course, just a little bit east of Diamond City. In fact, it's right around the corner from the combat zone, so I recommend going straight there after picking up Kait. If you are really struggling to find it, then you can pick up the associated quest, the Silver Shroud from Kent Connolly in the Memory Den at Good Neighbor, and that'll give you a nice quest marker straight to the front door. And right on the bottom first floor, you will find, behind a glass case that is locked, Grognak's axe. This is going to be the weapon that we're going to be using for our entire playthrough of this build. But don't stop there, continue up to the top floor of Hubris Comics, and there you will find on a shelf, kind of behind the set that you'll see up there for the Silver Shroud show, you will find Grognak's costume. And this is a fantastic piece of armor. It's a chest piece that gives you +2 strength, and then on top of that 2 strength, an additional +20% melee damage. So altogether, that should equal +40% melee damage, although honestly when I look at the stat changes on the weapons, it doesn't seem to be quite that high. So congratulations, because with these 2 items you now have everything you need to play as Grognak the Barbarian, even into our late game. And that seems a little bit strange. There are some downsides to these items. First of all, the costume has virtually no armor resistance, and it does take up your chest piece slot, which would normally give you the largest amount of armor, rather than a leg piece or an armor piece or even a helmet, depending on whether you're using ballistic weaves. And the weapon as well actually is not modifiable. Neither is the costume. Neither of them have any mods available to them, and yet they are still so effective that I would still recommend using them even into late game. And here's why, especially when it comes to Grognak's axe. So if you look at Grognak's axe in your inventory, you will see 2 of its legendary effects described. First of all, that it causes staggers in enemies, and secondly, that it causes a bleed effect. And both of these are true, and both of these are fantastic effects that make the axe really nice. But that is not what makes it so indispensable to this build. The reason this is the perfect item for this particular melee build is because of its hidden legendary effect, which is that it has a significantly reduced VATS AP point cost. So if you compare this as a weapon that already has pretty good base damage for a medium speed, it appears to be something that you would have guessed would have a slow swinging speed, but instead has a medium. So it already has pretty good base stats, but if you go into VATS and you compare how many times you can swing it with AP to how many times you can swing, say, a sledgehammer or a super sledge, the difference is very clear, and Grognak's axe will hands down become the winner, because it's very effective for us to swing even a somewhat weaker weapon 10 times with one full use of our AP bar than it is to swing a heavier weapon 3 times, because we want to build and fill our critical meter as often as possible. And the more times, the fact that it's doing less damage and swinging more often is actually to our advantage in this case. So moving on from Hubris comics, I do recommend, of course, at this point that you head to Diamond City. Everyone needs to go to Diamond City. There's all kinds of quests to pick up, but specifically you're here to immediately start the quest Diamond City Blues by entering the upper stands and going into the bar there, and you'll witness Paul Pembroke having an argument with Henry Cook about his wife. This is going to lead to a quest that ultimately is going to reward you with a lot of drugs. And while we're on this subject, let me just take a second to kind of go over drug and chem use specifically for this build. In a nutshell, drugs are good, okay? So specifically for Grognak, probably your best choices are going to be Psycho Jet, Psycho Buff, Buff Tats, and specifically Great Mentats are going to be really useful to you. Great Mentats give you +5 charisma, which is great for important quest persuasion checks, and it also gives you a 10% increase to your sale prices and buy prices. So together, that is just absolutely critical to actually making some money with any build that has a charisma of 1. So that's Great Mentats are really useful for all kinds of people, even high charisma builds. I still use Great Mentats, so never forget about those. And don't forget about your combat-based drugs either. I know me, sometimes when I'm caught up in the action, I forget, I just don't want to open up my Pip-Boy and scroll through a menu and just lose all of my interest in the combat, just clicking on some drugs. But they are so useful, I highly recommend putting, especially Jet, since it has the slow time effect, onto your hotkeys so that you have them accessible at all times. That way you don't have to break immersion, you don't have to break the flow of combat to get your drugs, because they are so useful and they're a lot of fun too, and you want to get value out of your chem resistant perk that you're going to be taking anyways. So don't forget, you can't get addicted anyways once you're level 22, so just pop them as often as you like. And now that you have a nice stash of drugs to work off of for a while, probably last you several levels before you run out, get back out there, and we're actually going back pretty much to where we sort of just came from with Hubris Comics. Not far from there, just east of Diamond City and a little bit west of Hubris Comics, is Trinity Tower. Now there is an associated quest with this. Once you start getting close, you should get a radio signal, and you'll hear a distress call from someone, and it will start the quest Curtain Call. And all you have to do is go to Trinity Tower and find the top, beat up all the super mutants on the way, and once you reach the top there, you will find Strong and Rex Goodwick, who was on the radio earlier, imprisoned in a cell. Go ahead, get the key off of the super mutant, or open the door however you can, and right behind them, you'll see on the desk is the melee bobblehead. That is why we're here, that's what we're here for. And it is going to give you a staggering plus 25% critical hit damage with melee weapons, and needless to say, with our luck focused build that is criticaling all the time, this is a massive benefit to us. It's probably the most useful bobblehead for this build. So speaking of bobbleheads, there are a few that we should pick up. The most important one for this build is the Strength Bobblehead that is found in the Mass Fusion building. It's northeast of Diamond City, pretty close to Cabot House if you know where that is. Next important, I would say, is the Endurance Bobblehead. Now, the Luck Bobblehead and the Agility Bobblehead are all located pretty close to each other, and these are the ones that I recommend that you get. So you can probably get them in one go, but they are all located pretty far to the southeast of the map. A good rule of thumb for Fallout 4 is that the enemies are going to be getting tougher the further to the south you go. So this might be more of a mid-game sort of a thing here, not necessarily an early game choice, but you can of course still find ways to pick up these things without having to deal with the enemies, stealth boys, however you want to do it. But the Endurance Bobblehead is found in Poseidon Energy, towards the southeast of the map, and then just a little bit more to the east and south is the Agility Bobblehead, which you can find on the wreck of the FMS Northern Star. There's lots of raiders there. And a bit north of that, I believe, and further to the east, off on an island that you can clearly see on the map, is Spectacle Island, where you will find the Luck Bobblehead along with lots of Mirelurks, so do be prepared for that. And just one more word on the magazines. This is really the only other collectible that I would say is critical for this build, is to collect the Grognak the Barbarian magazines. Each one of them is going to give you an additional 5% critical hit damage with melee weapons. So once you have all 10, that's an additional 50% damage, which is fantastic, of course. And these are pretty easy to find. I'm not going to go over all 10 magazines, but there are several that are kind of along the way for an early character. So of course the first one in Sanctuary you should be picking up out of your own house. That's very easy. If you pick up the first Minuteman quest, then you will undoubtedly be heading to the Corvega assembly plant, and I do recommend you pick up that quest. So there is a Grognak the Barbarian magazine there. You will be passing right by the Boston Commons several times when you go to the combat zone or Hubris comics, so make sure you go in there and grab that one. There's a little bit of radiation damage you might take, but there is virtually no risk in picking that up. You do not have to fight Swan to get that. And just two that you could probably get, it might be a little bit out of your way depending on which direction you take to go to Diamond City for the first time. But if you kind of go south and a little bit to the west and come around that one bridge, then you'll probably be passing by Vault 81 as well as the Mass Pike Interchange. And both of these locations have Grognak the Barbarian magazines. I recommend you pick up at least those first three. Those are virtually guaranteed that you'll be passing by, so definitely get those. So that just about wraps it up. We have absolutely everything we need for this build to really shine. It's going to have incredible critical hit damage at this point, especially once you get your better criticals perks. So you're pretty much set up to run around like a crazy barbarian. I do just want to give you a couple of tips on how to actually play the build. Of course, with a luck-focused build, you have to keep in mind that using VATS is very important. It can be fun to play outside of VATS, and I do, of course, do it sometimes, but with this build, you want to do easily 80% of your combat within VATS, because otherwise you're just not going to be taking advantage of all your luck perks, and that is the whole point. Another really useful tip that I would give to you is in how to use your Blitz perk, and at what point to pull up VATS and start queuing up your attacks. See, the thing you have to realize here is that the melee distance is being measured just from the initial point that your player character is standing at when you first open VATS to all enemies around him. So just from that static point to all the enemies. It's really useful to keep that in mind, basically, because what that means is that if you have enemies in a big circle around you, you just get in the center, right? And you only have to travel that 10 meters to one enemy, rather than, and then after that, after you killed the first enemy, you're not traveling 20 meters to the guy who was on the other side of you originally. You're just traveling 10 meters again from your initial point in the center. So basically the advice is, when you're in a room with lots of enemies, just kind of get into the center of them, and that'll maximize your range all around you. Another thing that you should definitely keep in mind is playing off of your two perks, Moving Target and Rooted. Both of these perks are actually pretty similar. They both increase your damage resistance based on whether you're standing still or you're moving. And of course, Rooted will also give you the very useful extra melee damage. So to help combat the fact that we're fairly lightly armored in this build because of our Grognak's costume, you want to stay on the move and close distance quickly with sprint to get the extra damage resistance from Moving Target whenever people are shooting at you. And then once you actually get into combat, you really want to practice this technique of stopping all movement just before your attack to get the rooted value. And you can actually, it's actually not as hard as it might sound to do this. You can actually pull off moving attacks that the computer registers as standing still attacks just because you stop putting an input on the direction. So once you master this technique, you can get the rooted effect and extra damage pretty easily, actually. And there you have it. That just about covers it. This is the Grognak build, and you can clearly see in the footage below what it is capable of. It is a lot of fun to play as. I can't stress that enough. I think watching all of these different luck perks, the 4-leaf Clover, the Grim Reaper Sprint, all of that, Ricochet, seeing those proc and just go off all the time, especially when a bunch of them kind of happen at once and the game is almost getting confused and suddenly you're getting triple experience from a Mirelurk Queen or some quest and just level up a bunch. This whole build is just a lot of fun, keeps you guessing, and even though it is a luck-based build, you really don't have to rely on chance to win. You're going to be dealing a lot of damage reliably, so give it a try if you haven't. So that's just about it. Thank you again for tuning into The Bigger Pixel. I am your host, the Gaming Mandroid, and if you enjoyed this video, if you like Fallout 4, please go ahead, leave a thumbs up, leave a like on this video. If you're interested in seeing more content, please do subscribe. Next week we will be coming back with yet another Fallout 4 build, where we will be playing around with a sneak and charisma based class that I like to call the Black Widow, kind of a pacifist sneaky build. But you'll see all that next week, won't you? Because you'll be tuning back into The Bigger Pixel with me, the Gaming Mandroid.